I absolutely love kids. I love to watch their zest for life and just their unhindered joy at experiencing new things. Their perspective on life can be good for my own soul as well. In fact, Jesus said the faith of a child is the kind of faith that we should aim to have in our own lives. But if you're the parent of a toddler, or if you've been in the presence of a toddler in the middle of one of those toy store meltdowns, you know they aren't always operating under an admirable set of rules. So recently, I sat down with a group of toddlers to better understand where they're coming from. And they shared with me a code of conduct known as the Toddler Rules of Possession. And so here's what they told me. Rule number 1, if I like it, it's mine. Number 2, if it's in my hand, it's mine. Number 3, if I can take it from you, it's mine. 4, if I had it a little while ago, it's mine. Number 5, if it's mine, it must never appear to be yours in any way. And number 6, if I'm doing or building something, all the pieces, they're mine. Number 7, if it looks just like mine, it is mine. Number 8, if I saw it first, it's mine. Number 9, if you're playing with something and you put it down, it automatically becomes mine. And number 10, hey, if it's broken, it's all yours. Well, we can laugh at this, but I wonder if the way we feel about our money and our possessions are really that much different.
Mine! Mine!
Mine.
Mine! Mine! Mine!
Well, we're in week 3 of our current series that's all about a 2-year initiative that we're calling One. And we want everyone to have one of these booklets because in here we outline all the details and opportunities we believe that God is giving us to expand His kingdom, and we want everyone to be in on it. And we'd love for you to bring this booklet back with you each Sunday for note-taking, but also bring it with you to small group as we've asked all of our leaders to facilitate the 5 weeks of discussion that are in the back of this book. Now, each week in this series is leading us towards what we're calling Commitment Sunday on February 28th, where we'll join together as one church with one vision to accomplish the one mission together by making a 2-year generosity commitment. And our primary goal for the One Initiative is to see everyone who calls Community their church home be a part of this. Just like we've been reading from the book of Acts, we want to experience what the first century church experienced when they joined together. Luke, the author, he tells us the whole congregation of believers was united as one. They were one heart, one mind. They didn't claim ownership of their own possessions. No one said, hey, that's mine, you can't have it. They shared everything. And as I read that, it sure doesn't sound like they would have agreed with the toddler rules of possession. You see, in a world that so easily drifts towards attitudes of me and mine, this community of Christ followers, well, they embodied a spirit of we and of ours. They're described as having one heart, one mind, and this oneness resulted in tangible expressions of generosity. But you know, it is kind of hard to imagine experiencing that kind of oneness, don't you think? Sure. But here's what I believe. I believe God wants to mature us and to grow us beyond a toddler's view of possessions. I believe God wants to transform us from a me view to a we view. And I believe God wants to make us a church that is united as one, where we're one heart and we're one mind. And so as we continue on this journey this morning, I want us to take a look at a story of a guy in the Bible who transformed from a me perspective to a we perspective. His name's Zacchaeus, and his story is found in the Gospel of Luke chapter 19. Now, Luke tells us that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. Now, I want to just pause right there to point something out about this guy's name, Zacchaeus. You see, his parents actually named him Zaka, which in the Hebrew means pure or just or righteous one. And I can imagine they had big dreams for little Zaka. And sure, he may have been just like all the other little toddlers throwing tantrums in the Jericho Toys R Us, but when they named him Zaka, they envisioned him growing up to be someone who was righteous, someone who cared about justice, and someone who was pure in his heart. And keep that in mind as I read on, because in the very next breath, Luke tells us that Zacchaeus, well, he was a chief tax collector, and he was wealthy. You see, in those days, the Roman Empire had conquered the known area as Palestine, and that was an area that included the town of Jericho, where Zacchaeus is. Now, the Romans had broken the land into 3 different regions, and in each region, guys would bid to become the chief tax collector. And how did you become the chief tax collector? Well, most likely by bribing a government official for the right to have the job. So Luke tells us that Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector, and that's a huge insight into who this toddler, Zaka, had now become. Now, to compound matters, after the Roman government had, assessed a region to figure out how much they should be getting in the form of taxes, well, they'd allow the chief tax collector to then surcharge the people above and beyond that amount to make money for themselves. So I'm sure you're figuring this out by now, but just in case you haven't, among the Jewish people, tax collectors, they were considered the worst of the worst, because not only did they work for the occupying pagan Roman government, the way they got wealthy was by cheating, threatening, and blackmailing their very own people into overpaying their taxes. I won't ask for a show of hands, but does anybody really want to be friends with Zacchaeus? Probably not. Well, continuing on, Luke tells us that Zacchaeus wanted to see who Jesus was, but being short, he couldn't because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Now, I think it's important to note that by this time, Jesus had become quite a recognizable public figure. And even though Zacchaeus is a shady, hated, greedy sort of guy, he's not immune to the curiosity surrounding this unusual rabbi. He wants to get a good look at Jesus, and so he runs ahead and he climbs this tree, and then Luke tells us that when Jesus reached the spot, he looks up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And then all the people saw this, and they began to mutter, he's gone to be with the guest of a sinner." Now, think about this scene for just a moment. There are hundreds of people in the crowd, and Jesus turns his attention to this one outcast in a tree, and he invites himself to have dinner. I mean, it's really pretty odd, isn't it? I mean, especially in our world, since it's not really polite to invite yourself over to someone's house for dinner. But what we need to understand is that in Jesus' culture, this was actually a huge compliment. I mean, especially to have a guy like Jesus, whose popularity is soaring, invite himself over to hang out. I mean, imagine someone like Beyonce or Peyton Manning calling you up and saying, "Hey, can I come over and we can order pizza?" I mean, you might be a little intimidated. I mean, you might be embarrassed by the state of your house, but most likely you'd be thinking, "Holy cow, wow, Peyton Manning wants to hang out with me?" Well, in Zacchaeus' day, eating with somebody made just a clear cultural statement. It was a sign of acceptance and value, as if you were publicly declaring that you were happy to be associated with this person. But again, it's one of those things that Jesus gets criticized for repeatedly in the Bible. I mean, people were often muttering behind his back, what's wrong with this guy? And he's hanging out with those scoundrels and those sinners. But our story continues, and Zacchaeus does take Jesus home, and they do have dinner. But there's a gap in this telling of the story at this point. See, Luke doesn't tell us what happened as they ate together. I mean, we don't know if they ordered Chinese takeout or if they put a frozen pizza in the oven. And we don't know if Mrs. Zacchaeus joined them or if this was just a guy's night. We don't really know what happened that day in that house somewhere in Jericho. But we do know this. Zacchaeus, his life was transformed. I mean, one meal, one day, one encounter with Jesus, and Jericho's chief tax collector, well, he starts singing a different tune. You see, in the very next verse, verse 8, Luke tells us, Zacchaeus stood up and he said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Now, just take a look at those words on the screen. Zacchaeus, the corrupt tax collector, the greediest guy in town, says, "Here and now, I give half my possessions to the poor?" I mean, really, it doesn't make much sense to me. I mean, all his life, he's been a me-first kind of guy, trying to figure out how to get more and more, and now he's all fired up about just giving it away. But he is for real. And we know he's for real because in response to his declaration of generosity, Jesus says, "Today, salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son came to seek and save what was lost." And so you know what I think? I think his parents were right. They gave him the name Zaka to grow into. And remember, Zaka means pure, just, righteous one. But remember, no one can become pure, just, or righteous until they encounter Jesus and until they make him number one in their life. See, it's only when Jesus is number one in our life that our hearts and our minds get transformed. And if we look closely, we'll see 3 outward signs in Zacchaeus' life that declare that God is, in fact, number one. Sign number 1, and this one's obvious, and we can see it right here in the story, but making God number one transformed his finances. You see, instead of amassing wealth for himself, he gave half his possessions away. And instead of cheating people, he made restitution. He started paying back 4 times what he had taken. Instead of managing his own money, for his own gain, he began using it to bless others. And so I wonder, what should our finances look like if God is number one in our life? And of course, no one here is in the business of overtaxing and taking advantage of others. But I mean, really, just ask yourself, are there ways that I currently manage money that are not honoring to the one who gave it to me? Am I honoring God with my spending decisions? Am I honoring God with my saving decisions? Am I honoring God with my giving decisions? It was just over a month ago that we mailed everyone a Christmas letter from Community. And like you, the Ciesniewski family received a letter in the mail as well. And since I helped write the letter, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it except to kind of read through it for any typos I might have left there. And, well, then I just kind of placed it on the counter. Well, later that day, I was working in my home office, and one of my boys walked in with the Christmas letter in his hand. And at first I thought he was going to ask me something about the vision we were casting in the letter, but to my surprise, he was confused. He was confused because, if you recall, at the very bottom of the letter, well, it included our year-to-date generosity to the Jesus Mission. And so he said to me, "Dad, why are we giving away so much of our money?" And I think when it comes to money, so many of us can make the mistake of viewing it as mine or ours. That's what Zacchaeus thought. But the truth is, it all belongs to God. It's really just given to us to manage. And see, understand, God isn't asking us to give him 100%, but he is asking us to honor him with 100%. And that's an important distinction that we have to wrap our minds around. Again, Zacchaeus begins this meal thinking that it's all his, and by the time the meal's over, he recognizes that everything he has belongs to God. And immediately he makes plans to reallocate and honor God with everything. So, making God number one transformed Zacchaeus' finances. And making God number one transformed his relationships too. That's the second outward sign. I mean, can you imagine the looks on the faces of the people in the town when they opened up their front door to find Zacchaeus standing there with one of those like giant publisher clearinghouse checks for 4 times the amount he had taken? I mean, can you imagine the expressions of gratitude from the people who now benefited from his generosity? After encountering Jesus and making him number one in his life, Zacchaeus suddenly cares more about others than his own well-being. He gave half his possessions to the poor, people he likely didn't even know by name. And please understand, generosity, perhaps more than anything, it gets noticed. I mean, you can't really hide generosity. I mean, one day somebody's poor and the next day they're well-fed. People notice that stuff. Many probably asked, why is he doing this? I mean, what changed in his life? And of course, the only thing that people could tangibly point to was the encounter that he had with Jesus. An encounter that's now changing his relationships and resulting in more people wanting to know about this Jesus. So let me ask you, I mean, even as I ask myself, has your encounter with Jesus and making him number one in your life, has it transformed your relationships? Do you find yourself more concerned for the well-being of others? If I ask the people closest to you, or if you ask the people closest to me, what would they say? When we encounter Jesus and we make him number one, our finances are transformed, our relationships are transformed, and in this story, I got to believe that making God number one transformed his purpose too. You see, I'd love to know the course Zacchaeus' life took after he met Jesus, wouldn't you? But there's no question in my mind that his life took a new focus, a new meaning. And see, that's what happens when a person encounters Jesus. He gives us a new purpose for our lives, to be on mission with him and for him. And for many of us, like Zacchaeus, our story of transformation is directly tied to generosity. And so I want to share one of those stories with you today. And so let's hear from Dave and Catherine.
I'm Dave Kratowitz. This is my wife, Catherine, and we've been coming to community for about 1.5 years now.
We were a little scared to come to community since it had been so long since we had come to church.
So I was always looking for something. Things just fell into place last summer.
We walked in, we immediately saw Chris, and he was so welcoming, and we had no idea who any of these people were, and they were so nice. And we're like, ooh, what's wrong with everybody?
And I started to notice things like, oh, this person has sandals, and that person's wearing shorts, and there's a football jersey, and just very non-judgmental, just very welcoming. And that's really what kept us coming back.
I would say I was just very lost for a long time, and it wasn't from not having support from my family or anything like that. I think I got mixed in with the wrong crowd of people and just made bad decision after bad decision. I think for me, using drugs and drinking all the time was more of a numbing, a coping mechanism. Numerous stints in rehab and this therapy and that therapy, and just nothing ever helped, and I was mad. I was mad at God. Things were so bad, and the drug abuse, everything was so bad, I actually tried to commit suicide. And miraculously, I failed at it, and I woke up 2 days later, and I know that God was right there then. I know he was there, and that's why, I was still alive. Finally taking that step and walking through those doors that day, it changed everything.
I have to thank God every single day for everything that he's blessed us with. I'm not a big fan of journaling. I have to force myself to do it, but for some reason I journaled years ago, 10, 20 years ago, when I was at my worst, and I found those journals, and to go back and to read what I was struggling with, what I was looking for, and to fast forward now to where we are and see that God has answered so many prayers over the years. Even before I really knew who he was, we were just very blessed, very blessed.
So I'm so thankful for everything that we've gotten out of community. I feel like if God wasn't first in our lives, I don't think we'd be anywhere where we are right now. In the past year, so many things have changed in our lives. In 1.5 years, we were baptized, we got engaged, we got married. We've helped out with Alpha courses. We just bought our first house, and I just know without God being the center of focus for us, none of that would have ever happened.
And I remember we used to give. We'd show up and I'd throw, $5 or $10 and then giving back to God. And, now I'm doing it online. When we got married and I started doing all the bills and I showed her what we were giving, and Her eyes kind of got big. I said, yeah, because everything we have is from him, and I keep giving and he keeps giving back. So he's blessed us, and it's our prayer that we can continue to bless others as well.
Everything that we have is because of God. So I want to pour back into helping other people find their way back to God in any way, shape, form that I can.
God is number one, and we are one on this mission.
Let me tell you what I truly believe with all my heart. Two things. First, I believe you're here today because, like Zacchaeus, you want to see and you want to know who Jesus is. And you want to make him number one in your life. Am I right? That's why I'm here. And that's really why I do what I do. And here's the other thing I know. Like Jesus said to Zacchaeus, he says to you and he says to me, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. And see, if we come down and if we invite Jesus into our house, he will become number one in our lives. And when he does, our finances, our relationships, and our purposes are going to be transformed. Like many of you, for the past 2 weeks, I've been carrying around with me one of these commitment cards. And in 2 weeks, on February 28th, we have an opportunity to come together as one church with one vision to accomplish the one mission together. And I really do mean this. Our primary goal for this initiative is for every person, for every family to be involved. I mean, if one person were to walk in today and just write a check to cover the expenses for everything we believe that God is calling us to do as a church over the next 2 years, we wouldn't meet our primary goal. Our primary goal is for everyone, like Zacchaeus, to make God number one in their lives through an expression of generosity. Not necessarily to give away half or to pay back 4 times, but to give in a way that honors God and makes him number one. And so, as you consider your commitment, let me just share with you a process that I am personally going through with my commitment. Step 1 is stretch. Over the past few weeks, I've reviewed my personal budget and I've begun to reallocate dollars from each category into my one category. I'm basically stretching the dollars for the next 2 years and I'm creating margin for one. Now, step 2 is sacrifice. I then went back over my personal budget again and I began to look more closely at each category. But this time, I'm not looking to stretch, but rather I'm asking myself, what would it look like to make a sacrifice in each area for the next 2 years? Now, some categories I can't make sacrifices, but in some, I can. Then there's step 3, and that's spirit-led. Now, I'm still in this step, and I probably will be all the way up till February 28th. Step 3 is about taking a step of faith. Step 3 is about hearing from God as to what he would have me give, even if right now, I'm not sure where it'll come from. See, I want my final commitment to be an amount that I am completely dependent upon God to provide. 2 weeks from today, on February 28th, we have an opportunity to come together as one church with one vision to accomplish the one mission together. And my prayer is that God will unite us as one on that day, one heart, one mind, so that together we will move from a me to a we. We will do that. And when we do that, we will be giving the opportunity to hundreds and thousands of people to find their way back to God.